Welcome to the Australian National University College of Asia and the Pacific in Canberra. My name is Nicholas Farrelly and I'm a research fellow here in the college. I also run a website on mainland Southeast Asian politics and societies called New Mandala. It's for that reason that it gives me particular pleasure to welcome to the Australian National University today Malaysia's most prominent blogger and a political activist of certain renown, Raja Petra Kamarudin. Raja Petra, it's wonderful that you can join us today.
Thank you so much.
So for those out there who are listening to this interview and who perhaps don't know so much about your background, I'd like to know whether you could just tell us how you first got interested in Malaysian politics and particularly the more activist end of things. What was the catalyst for you?
Well, I always tell people my career, if you wish to call it that, stretched over 30 over years, and it went through different phases. When I was in my 20s, there was in the 1970s, I got caught on with the normal 20-year-old idealism, wanting to have a revolution, reform the world, and all those kind of things. And then we had the Iranian Revolution explode at that time. So I got caught in with the Islamic Revolution, and I thought that was the way to go, I even went to Saudi Arabia and demonstrated in Mecca, pro-Iranian, anti-American demonstration and stuff like that. But of course, many years later, we sort of grow up and we realize that idealism does not always work in the practical world. I sort of moved on. I became more involved with my career, with my work. And it was not until, 98, when Anwar Ibrahim, the then Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, was arrested and he was beaten up. And then he was put on trial for sodomy. And I attended court, in fact, every day. And when I saw the way the trial was conducted, I thought there's something terribly wrong with the whole judicial system. And then I sort of got very involved with the Reformasi movement, or reform movement, which in a way was fashioned after the Indonesian Reformasi movement. And before I knew it, one thing led to another, and there I was right in the front of everything. And in the meantime, arrested and detained about 5-6 times until I decided it's probably healthier for me to continue my operations outside Malaysia.
It's now been many years since you first got started in internet activism. How did all of that get started?
Well, Malaysia didn't quite get internet until the early to mid 90s. I think it was 94 at that time. And a friend of mine was running this email service, and he persuaded me to sign up. And I said, what am I going to do with the email, He says, you communicate with people. I said, yeah, but who do I communicate with? He said, other people who have email. I said, okay, sign me up, And then I started looking for who else has got email so that I can start using my email. Here I have an email and I don't know who to talk to, So eventually over 2-3 years it sort of grew, my email network grew. And I was writing at that time for a newspaper, sort of government-owned newspaper. But I was writing on cycling and motorcycling, those kind of things. And of course, they wouldn't touch any articles on sort of social, economic or political issues. So what I did, I built up my own network. This is about, by then, maybe the mid-90s. I built up my own network of mailing list. And I started sending all my commentaries and views on the social issue, social situation, political situation, economic situation of the country. And then they responded, So eventually, that was even before we had things called Yahoo groups and all that, So eventually it grew. And then 98, as I was explaining, when Anwar Ibrahim was arrested and thrown in jail, I think it was a couple of months later, they formed a media unit. And this was the new political party that was created, the National Justice Party, which was Anwar Ibrahim's party. They formed a media unit and they invited me to head the media unit. And my job is basically sending out emails to various people on the list. And I suppose one thing grew to another. Then I set up a website, simple thing. It was called Raja Petra's website, that's all. And I put all my views on their website. And before I knew it, it was like everywhere I went and people say, hey, I read your website. And I say, oh, I read. So I didn't realize that the reach was actually quite wide. And then we started a party newspaper. And I think it was 2004. That was the year when the opposition saw its worst defeat in history. It was practically almost wiped out in 2004. And we thought that that's it, Malaysia is going to be reduced to a one-party system. And here we are trying to build a two-party system. Now I felt that the party newspaper is too restrictive because it talks about party matters, Whereas I felt the party newspaper should try to reach out to non-party people. So you have to be more controversial. You have to push the envelope. You have to be braver in addressing issues. If you keep trying to be popular and be cautious of touching what I call sacred cows, you'll never know, how far you can go on this. So I had I would say, difference of interest with the party on which way to go. They wanted to go the safe way. I would rather go the dangerous way and see what we can get away with. So eventually I resigned. I set up Malaysia Today in 2004 also. And all hell broke loose, I started my column. I had one column called Malicious and Seditious, but I eventually retired that column and I call it No Holds Barred. Another one I called The Corridors of Power. I in fact had many columns. I even had Monday Morning Blues and Thank God It's Friday, So every day I had a different article. So eventually I cut it to two, and I sort of embarked on criticizing the government on everything it does, and also criticizing the opposition on what it should be doing if it wants to be the next government. So basically I made enemies on both sides of the political fence, and even the opposition was terribly unhappy with me, especially on the things I raised and all that. So I thought, look, I'm not actually aligned to anybody now. I mean, the government has arrested me 5-6 times and thrown me in jail. The opposition party doesn't want to touch me with a 10-foot pole. So I might as well create what I call a third force, and go for the throats of both sides. And basically that's what I am today, But my sympathies certainly do lie with the opposition. I do believe that we need a very strong two-party system. One of the two parties certainly has to be the government, but the other one, which is the opposition, has to be a very strong opposition, sort of almost balancing the ruling party. And if we can have what I would say a third force, which is non-political party, but a movement or political activism grouping, which can sort of balance these two parties, not quite to be kingmaker, but be able to keep these two parties in check. Because, politicians, they make a lot of promises when they want your vote, and they conveniently forget it the morning after. And then when you talk to them, they sort of give you that blank look and says, when was that, So we have to keep reminding them that we want you to commit yourselves before the election, and we're going to be, over your shoulders, watching you every step of the way, And probably you should fear us more than you fear God, because we're really going to go for your throats, So I feel that political activism, in that sense, may be the route I want to go, rather than become the politician.
So turning just for a second at least back to Malaysia Today, can you tell us what, in your view, have been the real highlights of running that site?
Oh, I suppose we ran a series of articles called Kairi Chronicles. There were 30 episodes in all. That was revealing the shenanigans and the goings-on in the corridors of power. And we used to refer to Putrajaya, which is Malaysia's version of Canberra, except that it's more lavish than Canberra by far. And we call it the fourth floor. The fourth floor basically is where all the young Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard graduates are housed, and these are boys and girls in their late 20s, early 30s, who have received this Oxford or even Harvard education, and they're supposed to be the dream team, the whiz kids, the future generation. And these were the guys really behind the Prime Minister. Now, I don't know whether you're aware, it's not quite a joke actually, it's real, but it's made into a joke that the Malaysian Prime Minister then, before this one, before Najib, Abdullah Badawi, falls asleep a lot, and it's true. I mean, even when he was in Canberra, I believe they had a group photo, was it Canberra or Sydney? I can't remember, but there was a group photo taken, and he was actually asleep on his feet, standing on his feet, and he falls asleep. And we have hundreds of photographs all over the internet of him falling asleep during meetings, during events, during dinners, And we used to call him the sleepy Prime Minister. In fact, I believe even Australians call him the sleepy Prime Minister. So if he's always asleep, who's running the country? So there's these boys and girls, the whiz kids, or the dream team on the fourth floor. And nobody knew that we had this thing called the fourth floor. So what I did was, in that series of articles, we exposed all those in the fourth floor. And leading it was, of course, the Prime Minister's son-in-law, Khairi Jamaluddin, and all the sort of conspiracies that we exposed, that they plan to do this. It became a sensational, it sort of became like patent place of Malaysia. And according to the family, Abdullah's family, that was the main reason that they were brought down, because of that expose. So we were accused of being the instrument for bringing down the Prime Minister. I don't know whether that's supposed to be taken, positive or negative, but I suppose that would be the high. Everyone still talks about that, Why can't you come out with another Khairi? I said, well, you can only come out with a hit once, It's not possible to keep. So that was, but it ran for 13 months. It was a 13-month series, Eventually the Prime Minister resigned. But the worst thing is that everyone blames me, because they said what we got now is worse than the last one.
Are there any particular challenges with running the website that you don't think your audience is particularly aware of? What, in your view, are the real problems with running a website like Malaysia Today?
Oh, first of all, finance, It's costing us quite a few thousand Sing dollars a month just to host it, because we have to host it not only in Singapore but also in the US, and at one time we even had another location in Indonesia. The reason is we can't host our website in KL. Within an hour, the police would raid the place and confiscate the computers. Malaysia Kini, for instance, they've been raided twice and their computers have been confiscated. My house has been raided maybe 6 times, and each time they've confiscated my computers, and they've also confiscated all documents, CDs, videos, everything they find in the house. They cut away. I never get them back. Of course, my computer supplier is so happy. He sees me every month coming in for a new computer. But I said it's going to, it breaks the bank every time I have to buy a new unit. And so our problem is we have to be very far from the long arm of the Malaysian law when we want to operate. So as it is now, for the last 2 years, I too have been operating in the UK. I can no longer go back to Malaysia. And the reason I'm in the UK is just because I happen to be born there, so I have right of a boat, so it's convenient. I don't have to apply for political asylum or get a British passport. Even with my Malaysian passport, I can stay perpetually in the UK. That's the advantage of being there. But it's not something that you can operate in your home environment. You have to accept that you have to be in exile if you want to do this. The other thing that I would say burden or problem that we face is our website is constantly under attack, non-stop. Now, whoever's doing it must be spending a lot of money to bombard us with DDoS, DDoS attacks daily. and non-stop. And because of those DDoS attacks, we've had to put all sorts of preventive measures, security systems to deflect all this, And when we get this large DDoS attack, we have to sort of channel it to another server. We can't shut down the server because then the genuine readers will also get cut off. But there's been times when the attacks have been too great, we've actually shut down the server and wait for the attacks to subside and switch on again. So people will start SMSing me or calling me and saying that, hey, your website's down. I said, yeah, I know, we closed it down because of the attacks. So this is where we sort of constantly got to be on the run physically, the server. And there are times when the server's in the US, there are times when the server's in Australia. We got to keep running all over the world, and it's tiring, really tiring. I wish I could just sort of plonk it there and operate, but we can't. So it's practically as if we are running underground, working underground, and operating underground through the sewers and trying to escape. It reminds me of the resistance in the Second World War.
Raja Petra, I know that since you've been in Australia, you've been asked a fair number of times about recent events in Egypt and Tunisia and how they may or may not relate to what could go on with the future of Malaysian politics. All of that's very interesting, of course, but today I have a far more specific query. What I'd really like to know is, do you take away any lessons from how internet technologies have been used in those contexts? Can they teach you anything about the use of the internet for Malaysia's political future?
Well, to be quite cheeky, I would say that they probably took lessons from us, because we started this in 2004, and the reason we did this in 2004 was because of the disaster which the opposition faced. Now, when we looked at the election results, we found that all the seats won were mostly rural seats, and all the urban seats, the opposition lost quite badly. Now, this is also the area where the internet penetration is quite high. In fact, currently, according to the government, internet penetration for broadband alone is 57%, just broadband, and they're pushing it to 60% soon. But these seats were still lost, which means the urbanites were not getting information, were not convinced that we need a change of government. So we started Malaysia Today in 2004, plus many other websites, came up at the same time. And we bombarded the internet with news, exposés and revelations about what's going on, and the shenanigans, and even the transgressions of those in the corridors of power. And in 2008, we saw the results. Suddenly, the opposition swept all the urban states, and all those states that they won, Penang, Perak, Selangor, for example, were all urban, highly urbanized states, So in that sense, that 4-year program that we embarked upon to educate the urbanites through the internet worked. And now we got to go the other way. Of course, now we got to go back to the rural areas and try to swing the rural people, over to the opposition. So that was the power of the internet, or we realized the power of the internet then, and it worked. It worked for Malaysia. But because Malaysia's population is not fully urbanized, we have got the urban and the rural, so we need two separate programs to reach the two different classes of voters. But as far as the urbanites is concerned, I think we did pretty well, and the results was 3 years before the North Africa or Middle East. And of course the difference between them and us is and why the power of the internet saw almost immediate results there was because in the Middle East or North Africa, it was the people versus the government. So it became a people's movement, a people's uprising. Whereas in Malaysia, it's more like two political groups against each other. So what we need to do is to convince the voters which political grouping to back. Ideally, if it could have been, making the people rise to go against the political masters, then we might have seen what we saw in the Middle East. But the Malaysian government will never allow that. They've in fact given warnings. And we realize that if we start a popular people's movement, a la the Middle East, there'll be bloodshed on the streets, So we've always said that there's choices of the ballot and the bullet. Let's stick to the ballot, it's safer. And knowing how brutal the Malaysian government can be if we go the other way. They'll be the ones using the bullet, not us though,
Your new political movement focuses on civil liberties. Why, in your view, are civil liberties so important for a country like Malaysia?
People in the West take things for granted. You don't realize what you have until you lose it. But in Malaysia, the joke we always tell is that in Malaysia we have freedom of speech. It's freedom after speech that we don't have. And we got so many laws. We got laws like Sedition Act and you name it, which they can use against you in the event that they're not happy with what you say. And if they can't find any specific law to use against you, they'll use the Internal Security Act, the ISA, which is a cure-all law. And all they need to do is to issue the detention order on grounds that they believe you're a threat to national security. Why do they believe? They don't have to explain. As long as they believe, that's good enough. You can't publish a newspaper without a license. There's a law that compels you to apply for a license. Students can't participate in politics, can't get involved in politics. Like what you are doing now. If this was in Malaysia, the police will raid you and everything will be confiscated and, this university will be closed down and things like that. I mean, that's how serious they are about keeping politics out of universities. People can't convert. If you're a Muslim, you can't convert. Now, you might argue that that's Islam, that's a Sharia law. They have this anti-apostasy law which forbids you from converting. But there's been cases where there have been disputes, like the family denies that this Hindu man ever converted to Islam, that he was a Hindu from the day he was born till the day he died. And there's this power struggle over the body. The government comes and grabs the body and wants to give it a Muslim burial, and the family goes to court and challenges it and says, how can you bury him in a Muslim cemetery when he's a Hindu? And the court throws it out because the court says there's no jurisdiction to hear cases involving Islam. So it's very blur. So people don't know where to turn to when it's issues involving religion. It's as if religion is out of the court jurisdiction and you got to go to religious court. But religious court is very biased because it's an Islamic court. It always rules in favor of Islam. So if you're a non-Muslim, you will feel you got no justice. So these are the issues which need to be addressed. We've had cases where the government's gone and raided 7-Eleven and confiscated all the beers in the 7-Eleven, and it says that the law doesn't allow you to sell beer. You need a liquor license, and the government comes out and says beer is not liquor. You need a liquor license to sell liquor, but you don't need a license to sell beer because it's not classified. So there's a big quarrel going on as to whether beer is liquor or not, whether you need a license. And here we have the economy crumbling. We have a lot of social problems. Crime rate is extremely high. And we have the government and the religious department arguing over things like beer, So we find that the government tries to stifle everything that you do, control everything that you do, and to the extent that the government even wants to control what you think. We have this thing called BTN. BTN is basically a propaganda brainwashing outfit that's set up by the government. Every student who's going overseas for an education needs to go through a BTN course. And when they come back to Malaysia after their overseas education, again they need to go through BTN course. And the BTN course is pure propaganda. It's just telling the Malays that this country belongs to you, and the Chinese Indians are all immigrants and they're trying to take away your country, which is rightfully yours. Be careful of, so all this propaganda, spreading hate to make the Malays suspicious of the Chinese and Indians, and how are we going to improve, relationship between the different races when we got government sponsored or government organized hate campaigns, very racist campaigns going on, and can we say I refuse to attend those courses? No. If you don't attend those courses, you don't get to go overseas for your education. So this is where a lot of the civil liberties, we're not just talking about freedom of speech. There are many things under civil liberties. What about Malaysians who live overseas? We got 1 million Malaysians living outside Malaysia. They're not allowed to vote. And we got 3 million Indonesians living in Malaysia. And the 3 million Indonesians living in Malaysia can vote. Not only can they vote in the Indonesian elections, they also get to vote in the Malaysian elections. They get to vote twice, and because they're given Malaysian identity cards, And here we have 1 million Malaysians denied their right to vote, whereas the Constitution says every citizen has the right to vote, And they add this clause, as long as you go home to vote, you can't vote outside, But what about Malaysians who serve overseas, in the embassies as an example? Or they can vote, because the government sent them overseas. But if you go overseas on your own, not that the government sends, I don't allow you to vote. You go home to vote. I see. So many things Malaysians are being denied. Things which foreigners, Westerners in particular, take for granted.
One final question. You have something of a legendary reputation among many Malaysians already. But when all is said and done, what is it that you want to be remembered for?
Well, probably the man everybody hated. Well, I always said, when I first started writing back in 2004, what's my mission and vision? I said, if I can eventually be hated by everybody, pro-government as well as anti-government, then I think I would have achieved my objective. Because if I'm popular, which means I'm running a popularity contest, then something's wrong. Because my mission is not to be popular, but to knock as many heads as I can on both sides of the political fence, to knock the voters and give them a wake-up call. And I don't hold my punches. When I talk to the Chinese, I call them stupid Chinese. When I talk to the Malays, I call them stupid Malays. When I talk to the Indians, I call them stupid Indians. And I tell them why they're stupid, And initially, of course, it antagonized them. Later, I suppose, when I call them stupid Malays, they say, we agree, we're stupid. What should we do, So, I don't know. I suppose I just want to be outrageous and be remembered for being the most outrageous Malaysian that ever lived.
Raja Petra Kamarudin, thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.